Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Danielle Knapp. I'm the McCosh Associate Curator of this museum and the co-curator of Rick Bartow, Things You Know But Cannot Explain. So we appreciate you spending this lovely Wednesday evening in our building to talk about collecting Bartow. And we're honored that Rick Bartow has joined us this evening to attend the program. So thank you, Rick. So I'd like to just take a moment to introduce our speakers, and then we'll get right into a discussion. This will be a very question-oriented discussion, too. So I think early on in the program, we'll really be excited to hear if you have particular questions or responses to some of the topics that are raised. As you may or may not know, the exhibition that's on view upstairs through August 9th only includes 4 works from the museum's permanent collection. So over 100 works have all come through the generosity of Rick having lent work from his studio, from Charles lending work from the gallery, and from private collectors who have graciously allowed us to take works that they love, that they live with from their home, not just for the period when the show is on view here, but for several years as the show is traveling to other institutions. So in working on this exhibition, we've had the great fortune of working with collectors who have, in many cases, known Rick and loved his work much longer than my co-curator Jill Hartz and I have known of the work, and bring to that experience of planning an exhibition over several years a great wealth of knowledge that we certainly drew upon in talking with them and talking with Charles and talking with Rick about the importance of Rick's work and the context in which it has been collected and exhibited. So I think in the course of this discussion, we will talk about all of those issues. We'll talk about more general issues related to developing a collection. How do museums approach that process? How might it be different for private collectors? And what are the unique roles of the artist, the gallery, and the curator in that process? And so we have all of those wealth of knowledge represented in our panel. I'd like to introduce you to Bill Avery, who's a longtime friend of Rick's and a collector, great collector of his work. And Susan Kennedy Zeller, who's Associate Curator in Native American Art at the Brooklyn Museum. And Charles Froelick, owner-director of Froelick Gallery in Portland, who's represented Rick's work for many, many years. And so I think that to start, I will take a seat. And Charles, if you wouldn't mind, just to sort of kick us off, if you could talk about the focus of the Froelick Gallery and your working relationship with Rick, and sort of set the scene for this great conversation we'll be able to have about Rick's work and sort of the world around that topic. No pressure. Thank you.
Danielle wrote, how's this sound there? I'm terrible with microphones. Danielle wrote, explain my long-standing working relationship with Rick. Well, you know those stories about, like, when I walked to school as a kid, the snow was this tall, and okay. Hey, Rick, you're great. It's both, Rick keeps me so busy, and he has for almost 25 years now. The long-standing relationship that Danielle talks about for me and all of my artists, I opened my gallery with the intention to represent artists long-term. I wanted to be able to work with a range of artists, from emerging to mid-career to artists that were mature, and with the intention that I would be able to pick artists. I wanted to pick artists that I felt would stand the test of time. I'm trying to read the tea leaves or look in a crystal ball, and I'm just trying to make a commitment to artists that I have an intuition will be collected by museums and will have exhibitions of their work publicly and will be collected by municipalities and cities and individuals. You know, people will want their work on their wall. I mean, that's the dream of any dealer or any artist, that someone will want their work on the wall. So along with Rick, I represent about 30 artists. They're, for the most part, from the Pacific Northwest, and that's just our region. But I'm from the Gulf Coast, and I work with a handful of artists from Texas and Mississippi. I work with one from New York and a couple of printmakers from Tokyo. The breadth of the artists' style and genre and subject matter and media, those are what fascinate me. It's like I get to go see a different movie every day. There's a horror movie one day, and then there's a science fiction one day, and maybe a rom-com or whatever. But I find it more interesting to represent a broad range of artists, and also my gallery is my income, and my sales are my income. I don't have mommy and daddy paying for my bills. They didn't establish a trust for me, and so I'm paying everything that the gallery, all of our expenses, by the work that we sell. So I feel like a business model of representing a broad range of artists is also most sustainable, and I can also have a broad range of clients that if I only represented artists that were such as Rick, figurative or landscape artists, I would really only be attracting clients to the gallery that only collect landscape or only want figurative work. And it's eye-opening to work with an artist such as Rick and see how their work evolves over time. So a long-standing commitment. It means I want to help today, and I want to help tomorrow, and then next year and next year. I only want to work with artists that I can really enjoy conversations with, artists that I feel like I'm able to have a good communication with. It's a friendship in a way. It's absolutely a business relationship. We have to trust each other. I have to trust that my artists are making their editing decisions are strong, that they are trusting their instinct and making the work that they have to make. Not that the work that they feel will sell, but the work they have to make. That's the strongest work, in my opinion. So I want to see that work, and I want to see their careers evolve and grow. That's what I feel is the foundation for a long-standing relationship. I didn't go 10 minutes, but...
Oh, that's fine.
Okay.
That's just fine. Thank you. And so Susan's sort of providing a different perspective on that, too. Can you talk a little bit about your role at the Brooklyn Museum? I know you've been there for some time, and so sort of this is a museum that does have Rick's work in their collection, too. So talking about the scope of your collections, that would be great, whatever you could tell us.
Okay, has anyone here been to the Brooklyn Museum? Yay! The rest of you are all invited at any time. Good. The Brooklyn Museum was created in 1827, long before the Metropolitan or the Whitney or the MoMA or any of those. It's really the oldest major museum in New York City. It's what's called an encyclopedic museum, which means we have huge Egyptian galleries, the best First Dynasty collection in the world, actually, better than exists in Egypt. We were the first ones to show African art. We have contemporary art, we have American art, which is one of our strong areas, decorative arts, rooms that are all various period rooms. So that's essentially what it means as an encyclopedic museum. The Native American area was started in 1903, the old-fashioned way, by hiring a curator who went out into the field by train and buggy and horse and collected directly from the people in the field. So he collected about 9,000 items by going first to the Southwest, then to the Oklahoma Territory and that area, then up to the Northwest Coast area, then to the California area. We're fortunate that we have those kind of items not only in the collection itself, but also that he was a voluminous writer and he kept diaries. So in many cases, we have the records of who made what. So it wasn't just collecting anonymously. It was very important to him to know who made things. So that is the tradition that our department comes from. Today, we've got about 15,000 items in the Native American collection alone. So you can see it has definitely grown from there. And we grow it along the lines now. Historical items, yes, I will certainly accept into the collection as gifts. They normally are too expensive for us to buy. Where we grow, for the most part, is using the contemporary artists and growing with collectors, such as my compadre here, but also the artists themselves. So when I go out, I'm no longer going by horse and buggy and horseback, but I am going to markets, I'm going to artists' homes, I'm going to centers where they may be making things. I also do deal with repatriation issues, so I deal a lot with the tribes themselves, which is a very welcoming thing. When we do an exhibition these days, we don't just act as we say what the Native voice is. We work with Native people to say what the Native voice is. The other advantage that we have in a museum like the Brooklyn Museum is because we're encyclopedic, we can show Native art in the context of world art. Many of you might have been to the National Museum of American Indian, which is a fabulous museum in Washington, D.C., as well as there's a branch in New York City. And they do wonderful work, and I love the people there myself. They can only show Native art in the context of Native art. And Native art belongs in the world. It's part and parcel of the world. And I love the fact that I can show it as Native cultural art, but I can also show it in relationship to all other artists, wherever they have come from. And the person coming in can look at art in those dual contexts throughout our museum. So it gives us a pretty exciting way to be able to show and to present art. So my role as curator there has evolved from the first go out and only collect it from, and then you just show it as only Native art, to it's historical art, but what else was going on during that period? And today, like Rick's art, he gets influenced by other people. Well, maybe I have some of those people in my museum, or those cultures in my museum, or those artists, or those techniques that he's employing. And maybe one of his sculptures can talk to somebody else's sculpture. And the person can kind of look back and forth and say, what's going on here? So that's a lot more of the changing role of how a curator deals in museums nowadays, from the old just go out and collect only, and then you have little enclaves. The other thing is all museums have a profile of what it is that they collect. We're Brooklyn. There are 27 different ethnicities that we service, major ones. There's some other ones that are smaller groups of people. There's 27 different languages spoken around us. We are sensitive to all of that and know that those people can contribute to us while we contribute to them. So our education department is huge. It's very large. We start people as young as 2 years old and go until you die. So we love to be able to work with all kinds of people, and people who have accessibility problems or sight problems. We do trips for the blind and things like this. So that's another one of our mandate, is that we're in art not just to say what's the wealth on your walls. We're in art for people to learn about themselves and to learn about other people. And galleries that I work with and collectors that I work with are an essential part of that as to how we grow the collection in a direction that's going to be centered for our audience.
Wonderful. And for as long as Jill and I had been working on this project in the last couple of years, planning up to its opening in April, for as much time as we spent at the gallery or at Rick's studio in Newport speaking with these gentlemen, we were making frequent trips also to meet with Bill. And so that was a great resource for us. The first time I met Bill was at Froelick Gallery when he was visiting. I was fortunate to be able to be introduced to him there and talk to him about his collection. And so I've already had the great pleasure of getting to hear sort of the origin story of your Bartow collection. But if you could sort of share that experience and why you started collecting Rick's work and what that collection has meant to you, that would be great.
That's a good question. Let's see. Unlike some other people on the panel here, my academic background in art is basically zero. I've never taken an art class of any kind or type. I've read a few books, lots of magazine articles, and things like that. I first started collecting probably in 1970, and for years and years I would just, like a lot of people, I would see something I really liked and I would buy it. That went on for quite a while. I don't honestly remember the first time I saw Rick's work. I remember when I first started buying it. But I think my first purchase, was December of 1998. And at that point, I probably had seen his work for a couple of years. And I guess I'm mostly interested in his, I like his figurative work. I like birds. I don't like flowers. There's, like a lot of people, there's certain things I buy and there's certain things I don't. Even though I can appreciate it, I think when he draws flowers, they're fantastic, but they're not the thing that I buy. Birds and animals, and I think the transition pieces, the combination of the figurative work and the birds and animals, what interests me the most. It reminds me of one of my favorite Northwest artists probably from the last century is Kenneth Callahan, who was always drawing figures work into the landscapes. James Lavador did the same thing back in the early 90s. He did a lot of monotypes, skeletons, things like that, which I really like. And before I started buying Rick's work, I worked with a friend of mine, Susan Ellen Taylor, who's been in England now for about 10 years. But we spent literally probably 2 or 3 hours up above the old gallery space on 2nd Avenue because I've decided these are big pieces, and for me, the money that I had to spend, I wanted to take a good look at everything. So we spent hours looking at drawings and paintings, sculptures, everything. So I bought one in 98, I bought another one in 99, another one in 2000. In 2001, I won't tell you how many I bought, but 8 of them are in this exhibition. 3 of them are in museums, and some of them exhibited quite a few times. So it was about that time I got to know Rick. That's not why I probably stopped buying so many, but but up until then, I'd met with Rick several times, but after the Halley Ford show in 2002, I was down there at the opening, and he invited me afterwards. They had a big banquet for Rick's relatives and friends and everybody. I hardly knew anybody there, so starting from then on, I got to spend more time with Rick. I would go down to a studio, first several times a year, and we got to know each other pretty well. I continued buying work off and on over the years. And at that point, Rick would he would spend more time in Portland and usually stay at my place, and I got to know him pretty well. And his interests and my interests were somewhat similar in the other artists that we liked. At that point, I guess I decided I wanted to concentrate my collection more. I read an article about this one person, I don't know if it was back east or something, but he would collect something for 5 or 10 years. Maybe it was South American art, and then he'd give away the whole collection to museums. And then he'd spend another 5 or 10 years collecting something else, maybe African art, and then he'd give that all away. And some people, they buy landscapes, some people will buy portraits, they'll buy different things. I decided to, because I spent a lot of time in Arizona, I became acquainted with Fritz Scholder's work. And because of other artists in the Northwest, like James Lavador, Joe Feddersen, there's a lot of great contemporary Native American artists. So I decided I needed to focus my collection one direction. I decided to go that direction. And I still have a collection of some of the Northwest greats, some local collectors, especially people I know. And but there's only so much room in your house, or only so much. There's only so much you can actually buy at one point. Some people can buy lots, and I think a lot of people at that point, a lot of the work that I had bought, I've sold off an awful lot of it because I'd buy maybe 1 or 2 pieces by this person or that person. It was all nice work, but it didn't really fit into the scheme of things, and you can only do so much. So basically, I'm still buying other things, but I'm trying to focus on that area because there's some great talent in the Pacific Northwest especially, and I spend a lot of time in Arizona. I want to start spending more time in New Mexico. There's a lot available down there. And the more contemporary Native American work I see, the more I appreciate Rick Bartow, because to me, the level of creativity and so forth, there's just a huge gap there. There's some artists I like a lot that I'd still like to collect more, but and why I like his work a lot is hard for me to explain. People keep asking me, and it's almost like the title of the show. It's by nature, I basically think of myself as relying on facts, logic, rational thought. When I buy art, it's completely the opposite of that. I don't try to think about it at all unless I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to pay for it. But basically, it's just the impact it is, and it's just the way I feel when I see it. And I can honestly say, the best pieces I own and the most important piece, I think, it's not even a second. I mean, if I walk into a room and there are 10 pieces, and I don't care if Rick does it or who does it, there's one or two that just jump off the wall. And I know a lot of collectors will probably feel the same way, that if you try to explain it, it's almost impossible for me to explain why I like the art. And as far as you try to put it in historical context, I really can't, because I don't have an art background. But I think I've got a pretty good eye for art, and so basically it's just how I feel or what the impact is. And I can remember distinctly over the years when Rick would do a series of things, and I'd be in the gallery and they'd start throwing in. And I can think of one particular still in my house. I actually jumped when I saw. I mean, I've had people tell me the same thing. I mean, you see this and it just startles you. And you're not quite sure why, but it's just the impact that the art has. And like I said, there's some great artists, and in the contemporary Native community, there's a lot in the Pacific Northwest and the Southwest. I see lots from art around the country, and that's pretty much what my focus has been. And if you just look at the work, you can see the exhibition upstairs. There's things there. Some appeals to me more than others. And everybody looks at art differently, I think. And some people will like things that I don't like, and vice versa. But to me, it's phenomenal work. And I've spent, I don't know how many millions of images I've seen all over the world, in museums around the world and galleries around the world. I've seen a lot of great artwork, and I think this holds up real well. And to me personally, it's fantastic work, and that's why I collect it. That's enough for now.
That's great. And so hearing you talk about that experience too, and not needing a justification for works that you add to your collection, and being able to immediately act on that initial response, that's very different, I think, than how a museum collection is able to operate. Certainly our curators come to the work that we do with our own personal preferences and our own knowledge base, but anything we collect for the museum does have to have that justification. We do have to be able to provide to our collections committee, to our director, to the other curatorial staff, a reasoning that we have to be able to articulate of why a work makes sense, not just for our personal taste in our role, however long we may have it at one museum representing that institution, but sort of thinking about the long term, the foreverness of the work and how it relates to the museum's collection development plan and existing collection, and in our case, being a teaching institution associated with a university, how works might be able to serve the university population in addition to our museum community. And so how exciting that you're able to do that, I think, as a private collector. And so I feel like I know the answer to this, and then I know Charles can speak to this topic more too, but I think, Bill, you've said you don't really, it's not even a consideration really of needing to feel like you need to check off boxes when you're purchasing work of, oh, I need an early Rick Bartow, or I need a mid-career, or do you ever feel sort of that kind of guiding principle where you feel like you need sort of a representative body of work that represents Rick's whole career or any artist's whole career, or is it purely based on aesthetic response?
Well, in Rick's case, that is something I have done, because, and I know other collectors with different artists have done the same thing, with a few exceptions. I think once you collect a lot of work, you get to know the person. You start looking at everything from, you see some of the early pieces and some of the later pieces, and as a matter of fact, I have deliberately, well, gone out and then looked at things. I think in the first 10 years, a lot of people haven't seen a lot of that work. The 1979 drawings up there, the charcoal drawings, that's where it starts. If you look at the middle 80s, you see a lot of the bright pastels. There's one piece up there called Mask and Figures of 1986 that I found at a resale store. And I bought that, and I also bought a large Bartow piece, a newer one that I like, but that's the one I donated to the Brooklyn Museum. But the 1986 one is quite a bit different than a lot of the ones up there. And since then, there are a few things, like I said, the flowers I won't buy. I don't know why, but that's just the way it is. And there are certain types of things that don't interest you too much. I really like the birds, I like the animals. And I've also branched out. My favorite thing, I do have a few sculptures, I've got a few ceramics, a few etchings, more paintings now. Rick does lots of things well, but I think his drawing is sensational. And I think the large pastel drawings are probably my favorite. And sometimes even when he's painting, I think he's trying to draw. So, and I collect things. I don't have work from every single year, but I've got a fair amount of work over that period of time that covers a lot of it. And then after a while, I've talked to other collectors that, you know, if you get so much of this, then, you know, you want something different, and if you have too much of one thing, then if it's good work and some museum wants it, then that's one way to donate it and go for it.
Make space on your walls
Yeah.
for new purchases. Charles, do you want to talk at all about sort of that experience of working with collectors who are interested in early work or mature work or building a collection that's representative of an artist's entire body of work? Does that happen often, that people
Sure.
come to you with these goals?
It's occasional. I work with a lot more collectors that have 2 or 3 of this artist's work and 2 or 3 of this artist's work and 3 or 4 of that artist's work, and they really move it around. They want to have a range of artists in their home or in their collection, and some of them will keep the work at home forever until they downsize or decide to start giving it away or selling it or give to children. One thing I want to comment on is the checklist of like, well, what makes me make a decision? How do I make this decision? I heard Dave Hickey speaking once. He's a writer, and he said in formalism, people expect there to be like a formal dissection of literature or art. You can say, okay, there are these formal elements like color, gesture, proportion, line, pattern, etc. And you don't just go down a list. Well, it's got these 7 things. It's okay. It's good. Internally, you have to make your judgment about. You make your assessments based on what you've been looking at or based on your knowledge and your experience. And the more someone looks, the more they're able to make those judgments. And I don't mean judgment like good, bad, but responding to them. And Bill, that's one of the things that we've done. Like Sarah Taylor, she spent lots of time with Bill going through the drawers and finding. Another aspect of what my gallery does is we keep records on statements that the artists have written and essays that have been written about the artist's work or about specific shows or series of work. And those are helpful for building knowledge and understanding of an artist's career, what their position is in the context of the region, their peers, the type of work they're making, whether it's understanding of a cultural background or a gender background or just material or subject matter. There are all sorts of ways that people can go into those and find new information, glean new information, and start making those internal. Really, when I'm looking at an artist's work, even for the first time, I don't go, well, they they know how to do 3 of 5 techniques really well, so they're okay. They're better than halfway there. They might just do one really, really well, and that makes it an outstanding piece. And you kind of start internalizing that information. And for Bill, there has been a standing joke in the gallery. It's not a joke, this is a real assessment. It has to have teeth and blood for Bill to get, and no flowers. That's, we do know that. That is on the checklist. But that's, so that I'm stepping back a moment in conversation, but as far as the joy of collecting art is you really collect. You have that freedom to collect. You don't have to have a committee unless you bring your spouse or your partner, and you're like, you know, can you stand this being over the sofa or the bed or whatever, or the dining table, and then you go from there. And I am an art geek. I mean, I'm looking at it all the time, and I like the tougher things that are hard to figure out, that are hard to discern, and that are puzzles. And those I go back to over and over, and I find more gratification because I can keep unearthing new information. And I get a lot of information from collectors when they come into the gallery, and either fresh eyes or someone like Bill who's been looking for a long time, and they have their own set of filters or opinions, and they might notice something that's changing in an artist's work, and they might notice something that's evolving or more just changing. So I, as a dealer, find that really enjoyable to have long-standing clients like Bill. I mean, since the show's open, I see him just about every day. And really that dialogue is important. It's educational for me. And there are collectors there are people that buy artwork, and there are people that collect artwork, and it's a range. And I don't categorize like one is higher level of existence than another. I like people that buy a piece of art because they just love blue, or they love that painting, and they walk in, and if they instantly say, I want it, that's a great authentic experience. I'm thrilled when that happens. As well, if someone wants to come in and do some research, find out more about an artist's work, and they're intellectually intrigued and they want to learn from it or learn about the context, I'm happy for that too. I really enjoy I enjoy that dialogue of people taking time to understand the work, the artist that I'm representing. How's that?
That's great. Susan, if you could speak to sort of some of the considerations or criteria that you have in considering works or pursuing works for acquisition for your collection. I think you mentioned you're responsible for a collection of, is it 14,000 objects, which is the total amount of objects we have in our museum with 4 curators working with that. So I can't even imagine sort of having to take all of that into account. And
Well, unlike Bill, I do have a wish list. I have a long wish list of the artists who I really feel we desperately need pieces from. We just need this to go along with it. So we really, truly do appreciate people such as Bill who come along, and I could put a little tick by my checklist. Because it is tough. It's double tough for Native people curators to collect over non-Native curators simply because of repatriation laws. The best way that museums normally get funds is through generous people who give money to museums in many forms and in many ways, or an evaluation of their collection, and they discover works that no longer really fit in their collection. Their collection perhaps was going this way for 50 years, and now it's going this way. And they're perfectly good works, and those works normally go through a deaccession process, and they're sold. And the money, though, that those acquire must be used for new art. It cannot be used to buy a new bathroom, even though you might desperately need one for your museum. It has to be used for art. So you do have these funds available in museums, but I have, in a large museum like myself, I'm in competition with other curators for those kinds of funds on those things. So as you said, Danielle, I have to justify why something I want to buy is the one they should pay for. And which is where collectors come in who have come to me and said, hey, I have a really, are you interested? I think, I might be willing to, give a piece, et cetera, et cetera. So it's both important to me to work both with a gallery who I know represents the kinds of artists that I know are correct for us, and a collector who also is interested in that kind of a thing. So if it's, I'm another form of middle person. Some of the criteria I think about is not only is it right for the Native American collection, but in my case, because we are encyclopedic, I think how many other ways can I use it? I have a gallery for Native American art that's called Life, Death, and Transformation. My Rick Bartow can fit into that like that. We have American identity galleries. I have right a spot where I know it can fit in like that. We do special exhibitions on connecting cultures. It can fit right there like that. So when I look at a piece, I say, not only is it a wonderful piece, but how can it inform and talk to the rest of our collections? Not just the Native collection, but the world collections. And all museums will do that according to what their whole collection is, because you don't want your art, particularly in today's world, the art doesn't have a narrow focus, it has a wide focus. And you want to be able to have people see it in different lights and in different ways and get something out of it. So I want to be able to say, if another curator in my museum is working on an exhibit that is on, the color blue, I want to say, oh, I got a great Rick Bartow that has fantastic blue in it. We really should put it in. And they'll say, okay, well, now let's look at that one. So it's this kind of thing. So I have to think beyond my own collection and to what's right for the whole museum. And to give it that long-lasting life that says, once I'm dead and 80 years from now, people are going to say there's no way in hell we're ever going to de-accession that, because it's really essential to our museum in so many ways. It's got to be kept. And that is a tough job of a curator, but that's what we have to do.
Yeah, the JSMA operates on the same sort of principles that you outlined too, in that if we were to deaccession works, any funds that were created from that process would only be used for building the collection appropriately. And then also, if you're already familiar with the strength of our collection and our museum's history, having started out as an Asian art museum and having expanded over the last 80 years to incorporate collecting various cultures, different aspects of art production in the Northwest, and recently in past couple of years expanding into Latin American art and expanding our European holdings. We always have that consideration too of how is a work that we're collecting for the museum or an artist who we're interested in going to enhance not just that area of our collection, that sort of first neat, tight little box that they might fit into, but how else might they engage the other works that are on the premises, the other types of exhibitions we might plan to bring here. And we have 6 works by Rick in our collection. 4 of them are on view in the exhibition, and one of them is the large salmon scroll, Saki Nepui. That's the only one that I can speak to of the justification of why we acquired that, since all the others were acquired before I worked here. Charles, I think you probably might have more insights into why other works were selected with Larry Fong to join our collection in the 90s and early 2000s. But with Saki Nepui, we were so excited about the imagery of that particular work because it engaged not just this discussion about the importance of salmon to indigenous people in the Northwest, on the Pacific coast, but also that relationship with Japan and that shared importance of salmon in Asia, and the fact that this is a work where we have salmon represented in works in our Japanese and Chinese art collections, and we can have that conversation, that sort of cross-cultural, cross-gallery dialogue with works that we already own in other aspects of our collection. So that was really exciting to us to find something that we were able to purchase with funds from a Northwest art collection that we knew we would use in ways that extend beyond the Northwest. And are there stories you have about the other works? Now I'm curious because about the other works that we acquired. We have Two of the small sculpture that are on view upstairs are ours, and the very large drawing, Bear Coming, is ours from the museum. And
There's a pastel drawing. Is that in the show?
Bear Coming is in the show.
But a 40 by 26 that is.
Falcon's Dream and William are not in the show.
William, that's it.
And
that's
we
the one I'm
didn't
thinking of is
include William in the show, which is this absolutely gorgeous portrait in response to William Jameson's.
You've had them out often.
We've had them out, and because the show is traveling, and knowing that William had been published in the previous retrospective catalog and had been shown there, Falcon's Dream had been on view in our Birds and Flowers show. You only would have liked half that show because half of it was flowers, a few years ago. But selfishly, I thought, well, if we put all of our Rick Bartow works in this exhibition, we are promising to travel them for several years, and I am giving up works that I might want to put on view in the next 3 years. I wanted to keep something important and representative of Rick's work on the premises. So we weren't willing to let all of the museum's Bartows travel in the show for that reason, because we have other uses in mind, and 3 years is a long time to send everything out to other museums.
I keep thinking about this conversation and how it would relate to all the artists I represent, but I want to focus it on Rick. Right here.
Oh, I recognize that guy.
When I said at the beginning that truly there's no other artist that I work with that keeps me as busy. I mean, every day I get a call from a museum, email, letter, or a person walks in, or a package, and it's from a curator, it's from a writer, it's from a collector, it's from a museum director, it's from a teacher, it's from a student, it's from someone who's never seen his work, but they experience it on the wall, and then they need to know more. And it is really consistent and from people all over the country. And one of those aspects of buying early, middle, mature, later periods. Rick's not in his late periods yet, but the range, buying an artist's work on a range of their life, their creative work, means you can have an example of how that trajectory, how their hand changed, how their eye changed, what the stories were throughout their life. And if it's an artist that is, maybe this is me just saying that's a way that you can understand an artist's work better, is to be able to see it, have it in front of you. But as well, when it's an artist such as Rick, who has museums of such great interest all over, there are museums that will say, we have nothing by Rick. I mean, the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art here and many other Oregon and Northwest museums are fortunate where they've had donors, and the curators have been looking at the shows, and they've had regular access to either receiving gifts from collectors or buying. So they might have examples, but there are collections around the country, such as the Brooklyn Museum. They just received their very first Rick Bartow drawing, and that was as a gift from Bill. And I'm sure that there are other museums like Brooklyn and curators like Susan that would like to have examples to say this is some early formation where Rick is like experimenting with self-portrait and masks and graphite, and now he's adding color, and now he's adding flowers, and now he's adding more complex relationships, and then more material change. And because I have seen the interest grow and his resume is extensive, that's been a real joy, is to find people. Now I have this broad range of clients and writers that when I call them and talk about a certain period of Rick's work, we're talking shorthand, and it's really fun to be able to say, I need some insight on this, or what do you remember about that conversation, and this curator's asking for something. And the generosity of collectors is a real clear necessity of cultural institutions to give artwork. It's a benefit for you, and it's a benefit for the artist as well. So not just Rick. If there's another artist who you're really fond of, there are probably museums that would want to have a range of that artist's work, or I would hope so. So keep that in mind, that generosity, it means the public can then have access to seeing the work. There have been times when work has been, clients have come to me and said, I'm downsizing, or I'm dying, or whatever, and I'm wanting to just move some of this work in my collection and refocus my buying or whatever. And there was one sculpture that was offered here years ago, and it was so cool. It was called Custer's Last Stand, I believe. It was a little walking guy. It was fantastic. And the director could not be convinced. This is years ago.
None of our current staff was responsible for
None
this.
of
The
your
story
current
is
staff was
predating any of
And a curator was trying to be very persuasive, and the collector just said, screw it. If they don't see the value in this work, and they went elsewhere and they gave it to the herd. And I think it was a wake-up call for some other staff here that they just said, we can't miss those kinds of opportunities. And other people have come forward since and given work to the museum here. Yeah. And you've bought work regularly, and that's a real joy for me, is to know when, I'm happy to connect donors to museums, and museums are grateful, and you might think, the Brooklyn Museum, they probably have more money than God, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it takes a lot of money to run an institute like this. It's like cleaning the carpet and running the wire and all the staff and all the insurance, everything. And the amount of resources that went into this show was enormous. Danielle and Jill and everyone here at the museum just put so much incredible integrity and work and focus into this exhibition. And it will travel, and a lot of people will see it. And it's also been funded by a lot of generous patrons. So,
And the philanthropic nature of collectors, too, it's certainly always a great benefit to us in the different ways that collectors have supported us, whether it's through financial gifts or gifts of artwork, but also support of our programs, support of coming to exhibitions and artist talks, and being involved in that very active conversation of making sure that the artists whose work they collect and are interested in is getting that sort of exposure that people who might not have been introduced to their work before are having that opportunity. But also, we benefit greatly from working with galleries that offer us discounts on work sometimes to make it possible for a museum to acquire a work that's really important to our collection, who are willing to allow us to work with them, hold works for us while we try to pursue funding. I've applied for grants sometimes with wanting to buy a work at a gallery where I've had to ask the gallery to hold the work that I have my eye on for our collection for months while waiting for grant funding. And that means that there may be people interested in that work, and they are allowing us to have that right of first refusal and being patient with our very long process of applying for grants at a state institution and needing to work on timelines that are beyond our control. So I certainly think that with museums and galleries and artists and collectors, when any one of us is doing our job well, it's benefiting everyone else. If a gallery is selling work, that's benefiting the artist, that's benefiting the museums who also have work by that artist. And it's this whole ecosystem, this cultural ecosystem that we all work together very closely in the hopes that then everybody benefits, and especially viewers of the work. I want to make sure that we have time before we talk to audience questions, so maybe for the next 10 minutes too, talking about sort of some of the best practices and considerations that private collectors might want to have when considering pursuing a collection of a particular artist's work or collecting in sort of categories they're interested in. We've talked amongst ourselves before about documentation practices that collectors might want to do to support their art collections, and sort of that sense of, I know in my experience with having worked with collectors, especially when we did our big community collecting show 2 summers ago, that sense of collectors who are so stewardship-minded, who are thinking about the work in their collection not as something that is theirs, is in their house, and that's sort of the end of it, but also thinking about the life of the object beyond when it might be in their collection. Thinking ahead to what is appropriate. Is something that I own something I do want to give to family, or do I want to find a museum that would be an appropriate place for it, and all of those considerations.
I can easily speak to that. Number one, please, if you buy a piece of art, keep your receipt. Press it in your memoir book. I don't care where you have it. Keep your receipt. It has a date on it, and it proves you bought it and where you bought it and who you bought it from. That's provenance. That is the most essential thing that you want for any piece of art that you have, is that provenance. Number 2, insure your art. That's a second form of provenance because your insurance will have dates on it. So if you bought something 10 years ago and you've got an insurance policy, don't throw that policy out when you renew it or you change policy holders. Save it. Because any museum who is going to accept a gift from you later must have the provenance. It's essential. Or they won't be allowed to say, yes, we would adore having this piece. We all tend to think of provenance as something that's maybe, like the Nazis who stole all the artwork and everything. Well, anymore, there's so many international laws and rules and regulations about artworks crossing territories. And, we might think, well, Rick's right here in the United States. Well, what about if somebody in Canada wants it? That's crossing a border. So it's very important for you to keep that kind of information. Secondly, if you do, as a good collector, recognize that perhaps your work needs some conservation work, and so you call a museum and you say, gee, Susan, I got this wonderful drawing from Rick Bartow, and you know what? It's got this wrinkle right along this whole corner. What am I going to do? I'll say, here's 3 people who can fix it for you. Keep a record. Keep a record. They'll be independent. They'll fix it properly for you. Your piece will be in good shape. It'll last forever. Just keep that record. On such and such a time, so-and-so did this to your piece. They'll give it to you. Any good conservator will give you that kind of thing, because that's the second thing that you need to do. You have a responsibility if you've created an artwork to maintain it, short of your house burning down or mudslides or earthquakes or all of the natural disasters that hit us that we have no control over. I mean, I've had an 80-foot tree hit my house once. But, the regular things, you just go ahead and keep those records. They don't have to be fancy. They don't have to be scanned and in the computer, just the paper. Keep them in cellophane, keep them in notebooks, keep them any way that you possibly can. And that is so helpful. It'll be so helpful for yourself. Someday we all are going to die. Your estate will be able to use that to help evaluate what your estate is worth as to when your pieces came in. So your children or your heirs or your grandchildren will have that record. It's not hard to do, but I mean, we can't, for instance, as a museum, I can't accept anything that comes in from Mesoamerica past 1972. There's a law that says you can't. 3 months ago, they passed a law that says we can't accept ivory. That anyone who cannot sell ivory or give ivory, they can give ivory, but it's a total gift. They can't have a tax deduction. So laws are constantly changing, and you have to be aware of what those laws are. But if you can't keep up with that, at least just keep up with your own little collection. That's not too much. And the other thing is that in houses, yes, you do normally want your, many of your works out as much as you can, but, closets are made to become good dry storage areas. And don't feel bad if you create shelving or ways to store your paintings or your things, and then rotate your art just like a museum does. Don't leave a beautiful drawing out where it's going to be hit on light for 5 years. Do you know how often we rotate drawings? Every 4 months. They're fugitive. They'll disappear. Do you want it forever, or do you want it to disappear? So just a little common sense for yourself. If you have a wonderful bright light in your living room, well, don't have it shining on your painting all the time. Have filters over it. Or if you have huge glass windows, get those special little screens, that you can put on. Because it's, you have a responsibility to yourself, number one, and to the artist, number two, to maintain those works. And it's kind of simple to do, really, if you just think about it and think about the fact that you shelled out nice money initially to have it. but the record keeping is just really just fundamentals, and as they say, it doesn't have to be fancy. You don't have to go out and buy some magic, word program that's, the collector. No, just, keep your files, keep your records, and it makes all the difference in the world. To yourself, to your heirs, to anybody you want to give something to, be it a museum or a personal person. They'll be very grateful for it. They will really appreciate it. And that is what provenance is. And that's crucial for everyone.
We try to go back and, well, any artwork that we are caring for our artists, if it's in a show, if it's reviewed, if it's reproduced in an article or a book cover or in a book or included in a show that travels, or if a curator has written about it, anything like that, we have a provenance section in our database. We do have a digital database because we have thousands of works in the gallery by these 30 artists. So we're managing and tracking location and where are they, what are the values, et cetera. But provenance, it's always the question when we work with museums. They want to know the provenance for everything.
There's a simple way if you have a video camera or your phone these days. You video the daily newspaper and then you walk around your house videoing everything. It's a record that on that day you had all of that items. So maybe you actually had it 5 years before, but if you have no record existing from the past, you can make a record today very easily without getting fancy about it. So I say just take the daily newspaper, say, okay, this is it, here's your headline, you can prove what the date is, and walk around your house with your cell phone video on if you want, or whatever works for you, but you'll have all of it. You'll be able to say, oh yeah, it definitely was in my house over my sofa, on this date, because here it was. So if you have no records, you can create on there.
Bill, do you keep all your records?
Oh, yeah. It's pretty simple. Well, it's not always simple, but you keep all your receipts, and if you have much of a collection at all, then it has to be a separate fine arts policy. It's not going to be any of your homeowner's insurance, I'll tell you that right now, especially if your collection's worth more than your house, and that's what happens quite often. So, and my last 3 or 4 houses, I think most of the windows are on the north side, so I don't allow direct sunlight on anything I own, period. And make sure things are framed properly, get the UV protection. It's not perfect, but if you stick with indirect lighting and it's framed properly, and even things that aren't framed, you now have things like this that are archival. By the way, this is one of my favorite pictures. It used to be oil paintings can be kind of dangerous, but this is on these pastel drawings. When Rick has to spray the fixative on there, this is what he looks like. But paintings are easier to protect in some ways than drawings, although if you have glass or plastic over the drawings, then that adds protection also. But I have lots of things right now that are not framed, but you can buy archival material where you can put them in these sleeves, put them in booklets, and you can keep them for a long time. And that's just the way to preserve it. But you keep your receipts. Now with these phones, you can take pictures of everything, and your insurance agency every year update it. You sell this, you add this, you do this, and once you get started, and then if you have images that are appearing in books and magazines, or they get in exhibits and stuff like that, you definitely want to keep that, because that's, when it comes to provenance, there's nothing better than that. But that's just something you have to do.
Excellent public service announcement. Because museums do appreciate if someone is offering us something and they have that folder ready to go. It makes our life a lot easier and helps us sort of be more readily able to exhibit the work, publish on the work, whatever use we might have for it if we have that to start with. We'd love to know if there are questions from the audience at this point. Oh, great. Yeah, John.
I have one for Susan.
Sure.
She said you have 15,000 Native American pieces in the what proportion of those are on view or displayed at one time, assuming that they're not all on?
No, they're definitely not all on view at one time. I have about 300 of them on view right now, which would be typical on there. Some of them are not in conditions that are displayable on there. Some of them are sacred, and I do not display anything that is sacred. That's sensitivity to Native peoples. They have not necessarily asked for them back, which they could do under repatriation laws, because they are, in some cases, they just haven't gotten to it yet, or in other cases, they are pleased with the way we have stored them and saved them for them, and until maybe in the future, 20, 30 years down the road, they have their own cultural center where they might want them back. They're fine with us keeping them. We have a tremendous amount of scholarship that comes in to look at our collection, both Native and non-Native scholars. They will come in and we work with them on whatever category they want to work on. Are they a basket weaver, which is, oh God, I love working with the basket weavers. They tell me so much. They are just amazing, you know, or bead workers, or they're from a particular tribe. And I mean, I had one basket worker who looked at one of my baskets, and she looked at the bottom and she said, "Oh, this was made by my good friend Priscilla's grandmother." And I said, "What?" And she said, "Yeah, that way that's finished down there, only her family does that. And based on when you got this in the collection, her grandmother must have done it." So collections have more of a life than just what's seen out in a gallery. The educational aspect of it for Native and non-Native people is tremendous. And it's our responsibility to see that that's still available for them and that they can come in. And I work with a lot of both Native and non-Native scholars in the collection. We have, it's not always the case, our collection some years before me was in the basement, not good space. It's all in good areas, it's all climate controlled, it's all controlled. We have our own conservation department within the museum so that if we see an issue with something, we can get it to them right away and things like this, so that we can work with things like that. But it also lets us on things such as drawings or baskets, things that you shouldn't have out on view constantly. It lets you have enough that you could rotate. So I don't put a drawing out for more than 4 months at a time. So I want to be able to rotate my drawings and, you know, keep changing them within typically the same spaces that they're inhabiting. So you have parameters that you're going to. But it's my job to also conserve and protect those artworks so that they'll outlive us all and other people in other generations are still. So it's both ways, yeah. I mean, as no museum puts everything out. But yeah, it would probably be ideal, but we do use things in other things like education programs. And as I say, I added up once. One of our board members wanted to know how many people had visited the collection. And it was something like 57 different people had visited the collection in the previous year to do intensive work. And that's not too shabby when you consider that we learn from them and they learn from us, you know, and that's information that's out there for the rest of the world to have as well. Yeah.
Another benefit of like the museum here, the Jordan Schnitzer Museum, having 8 works is they can be selective on which pieces by Rick are out now and which will they rotate in the future when this show goes away. And what's the context of those? How can they be displayed differently?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It occurs to me too, since we are recording our panel, if we can rephrase questions or ask questions again into the microphone, just to make sure that they're recorded and heard by everyone. I didn't think of that until just now. That would be great. But yeah, are there other questions? Yes, please.
I have a question about just collecting in general. You've all kind of mentioned it, but I guess what I'm wondering about is, as you are looking at artists and deciding who you're going to represent in a gallery, who you're going to have in the museum, or who you're going to put in your personal collection, that to me is kind of the question, how do you decide that? How do you get there? How do you, I mean, there's lots of great art. There's lots of neat artists. You know, I know with Rick's stuff, 'cause I've known him for a long, long time, there's a disclaimer here, you know, that he's, you know, I think there's something about his work that's just different. It strikes me different. But there's other artists the same way. And so I'm kind of curious. I know there's no checklist, but obviously there must be, in a sense, a checklist. Maybe it's in your heart. I don't know. But anyways, I'm just kind of curious. How do you make those decisions? How do you make the decision who you're going to represent in your gallery, who you're going to have in your museum, who you're going to collect personally?
Essentially, his question is, how do you collect personally? How do you represent in a gallery? How do you represent in a museum? How do you make those decisions? It's a very old-fashioned word, connoisseurship. It literally means taking all of the elements of the artist, how it works with the collection, the expertise, the artist oeuvre overall, and saying, how is it going to merge together and work? And that's literally what becoming an art historian or a curatorialship or being in a museum program starts to teach you, how to exercise that. There are some people who I have had work with me as interns or students who are marvelous, and they are great at handling certain problems in the museum and things like this. They've got the eye of a toad. They just don't get it. They can look at 20 photographs and I'll say, choose the top 4 for us, not that they're all, you know, not that some are bad, but choose the top 4, and they haven't a clue. They just, it doesn't merge for them. And it's very hard to put your finger on exactly what it is that speaks to you about those pieces. Some of it is knowledge of the collection. Some of it is knowledge of your gallery and who your customers are and that kind of a thing. But the rest of it is just instinct. I have many friends, and most of us do, who are artists. And every time I go to one of his openings, and I'll walk in and I'll say, oh, Jim, I'm getting that one. And he'll say, shit, Susan, you always pick my best one. You just, it comes to you, and you learn to trust yourself. And I think you can make mistakes. And if you're interested in collecting like Bill, don't worry about that. Make some mistakes. Those are the ones you can offer to a museum.
If you have your paperwork for it.
No, or you could change, or you could rotate. I mean, you know, life goes on. You change things. You know, don't worry about it. If you, like you said, Bill, if you come in, you like it, and you see it, and you go for it. Yeah, go ahead. Trust yourself. You know, not only that, I mean, I'm charged with doing it for public spaces, so I have a lot of other considerations to take in. Bill can please himself. I mean, you know, he don't care if anybody else likes his collection or not. You know, he does, and that's what counts, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And Charles says, I know my gallery. I need to make a living off it, but I know I can do it when I've got these particular people, and I know the best of their works, and I'm not going to, if he had an artist come in, and their work suddenly had slipped a tremendous amount, he'd say, you know, I don't think we're going to have a show of yours this year, you know, and
It's happened.
yeah.
And sure, I'm in business and I want to sell art, but I don't want to represent artists that's the sole reason that they're making art is to sell, or that it's easy to sell, or I want to represent artists that are challenging and fascinating and, you know, moving the ball forward, moving the needle forward, so that there's a bigger dialogue, and that it's not just like, oh, I love ducks landing in the water. No. There's another place for that.
Yes.
There's another place for that. And not that, and I'll say, like, how do I, like, Rick's flowers. I mean, there's exquisite pain, and there's gentle, quiet beauty in them, and they're unique. They're Rick's, but Bill doesn't respond to them, but I love them. I've got one at home that I just think is fascinating, and it's an assimilation of experience in Japan and looking at handmade paper making and other Northwest artists' work, Morris Graves, and there's an assimilation, and it speaks volumes. But to other people, it's a duck paint. You know, it's just like looking at a duck landing on the water. So, some things that I go through with, okay, if I want to work with an artist, maybe I said this the other day to a class at PNCA, Pacific Northwest College of Art, and I was trying not to squash dreams or anything, but it's so hard. I mean, you have to work so hard as an artist. You have to want to be professional. You have to want to be able to make deadlines. You have to be able to make deadlines. You have to be able to have a conversation about really authentic honesty, like why are you making the work? What motivates you? What interests you? And from there as well, like the story unfolds. It can be what music are you listening to? Where do you travel? Who are your artist peers? But it's being able to talk about the work, being able to make deadlines, being able to have a pleasant conversation that's not just like, how many did you sell? Why don't you're late, or I need money fast. I need money now, or I mean, that's a terrible stereotype that artists are always wanting money. We all want to. I mean, if your payer didn't give you your paycheck on time, you'd be calling them too. So I don't blame an artist one bit for being vocal about that. But to keep it on track, right? I'm at a point where I've had the gallery 20 years, and I work with enough artists that it's hard for me to imagine how I would have any more time to represent and do really good work for an artist. And right now I'm in a very slow assessment of like any artist's work. I want to have a lot of conversations with that person, and I want to see a lot of their work, and I want to see that there's a real strong maturity and commitment, or that there's an early bright passion in someone, and they seem like they have it together. So, but I haven't taken on new artists in the gallery recently because it's so much work. I want to do my best work representing so I can understand. I want to take the time, all my staff, we all do, we want to take the time to understand the artist's work. And so when someone comes in, like when Susan calls or when a curator calls, we can't just say, oh, well, let me find out. I mean, we can do that a certain number of times, but we need to know what we're talking about. We're the interpreter.
And to mention, too, connoisseurship, the development of that is such a slippery thing. There's no shortcut to it. As someone who's only worked professionally in museums for 5 years, I know that I have a long way to go. And the work that I do in my job here, I'm mindful of wanting to sort of develop that, thinking towards the future, because it's not something you learn in a graduate program. You can learn theory in a graduate program. You can learn object handling in a museum internship. But there's no way to come out new into this field to be working with artists and immediately have that developed. And so there's that sense of making sure that while you are trying to pursue that aspect of your own practice as a curator, that you are making sure you are exposing yourself to all of the different work that's being created, reading about artists' work, visiting, talking with gallerists and curators and people who have been working with material longer than you, and making sure that your eyes and ears are open at all times, because there's no shortcut to get to it any sooner. And so you have to make sure that you are in a position, if you're sort of an emerging professional helping make these decisions, you're in a position to learn to trust your own instincts, but also to make sure your instincts are fully informed at the point where you're making decisions that affect an institution and what will permanently live here. And it's a very daunting and very exciting and very challenging aspect of the job.
And we're bound to leave some things that 50 years from now, they'll say, whoa, what the hell was she thinking about? So yeah, we'll make mistakes too. We try to minimize all of those. But, and you know, don't worry about it when you're personally collecting. Will you make some mistakes that a few years from there, you know, you'll say, oh, no, I no longer want this. That's okay. So what? You know, change it. Give it to someone who does want it, you know, or sell it or whatever the case may be. Yeah, it's, you know, your tastes and your likes and dislikes evolve, you know, as you yourself become knowledgeable about that artist or that group or that medium. You know, someone will start collecting pottery. And, you know, they'll only collect, you know, names they know like Nampeo. And then all of a sudden they'll realize, well, who's this person? Well, they're like kind of the hottest pottery artist that is alive today. You know, like, well, well, maybe I should have one. Well, okay, fine, you know, go get yourself one, you know, kind of a thing. Well, but what do I do with my Nampeo? Well, do you still love it? Yeah, I still love it. Well, then keep it. Why not? You know, you still love it. You can love more than one thing. That's okay. You can love a lot of things. Yeah, that's okay too. And as your tastes evolve and change, you can still maintain. So I say that's what closets are invented for, to keep that spare art in so you can haul it out and then you can have a whole afternoon saying, oh man, I forgot about this one. I really like this one. You know, and you pull it out and I got to put this one up again. You know, and you do. That's a fun afternoon.
I think most collectors are probably constrained by space and financial resources. So, like I said, when I started out, like I bought all kinds of things. Most of them I think were quite nice, but at some point you need to start focusing, and there are some collectors that can buy things by the thousands and store them and exhibit them and so forth, but most people can't. So if you buy more and more, with the resources you have and the space you have, then you start focusing on whatever is what's most important to you, and that's what you. That's what you continue to collect, and then just because you don't collect something, that doesn't mean it's not any good or you don't like it. But that's all there is to it. I see lots of fantastic art, but I can't buy it. And in some cases, I wouldn't anyway. I got other things to do, so it's not a problem.
Is there maybe one final question? Yeah, in the back.
I came here hoping to learn a little bit about Rick Bartow's artwork, and in light of this conversation, I was wondering, how do you see his artwork? And is it an artist working with color, or is there a historical narrative there? Is it political? Is it in the native tradition of, you know, is there an archetypal language there?
So the question is, how do we summarize Rick's work? And I know that Charles has been asked that before, and we've certainly been asked that in our roles as curators working on this exhibition. And just before we sort of go into a response to that very good question and very rich question, something that I've been doing with all the classes that have come to visit this museum, not in every case, but often, since we do have classes that have come to see Rick's show that come from studio art, art history, but journalism, political science, all these different disciplines represented on campus. It's sometimes, depending on the nature of our tour and the size of the class, I've started out by talking to students, kind of taking stock first of if they were familiar with Rick's work before today, before they saw their instructor was bringing them to see the show on their syllabus. And often with the college students, they haven't been. So it's been really refreshing for our museum to be their first introduction to his work and to be introduced to his work in a space where they are surrounded, not just looking at one work or two works on view or a smaller gallery show, but to be surrounded by over 100 works. So we've been having this very honest conversation of me asking them, you know, what might your expectations have been if you had been told today you're going to come and see a show of a contemporary male artist's work? What might your expectations have been if you were told you're going to come see a show of a regional artist's work, of a Native American artist's work? All these different categories that we could at any one time use as a very valid explanation of Rick's work. And it highlights the fact that context and the way that a museum represents an artist, the way they present the material, the ways in which an artist's intention and voice are represented completely can change the way that people approach the show and what they take from it. And so with that being said, I think that we have hopefully in this exhibition been mindful of the fact that we want to acknowledge that there are different explanations of Rick's work, of his sort of motivations for creating work that are equally valid, that have come from conversations with the artist himself, come from careful looking, from talking about the work with people who have looked at it with us for many years. And so I think that I feel it's difficult for me to provide a soundbite that situates it, because we've been trying to think of it very broadly, and sort of some of the things Susan mentioned earlier about not putting artists or materials into sort of a mental box and thinking about how it relates as part of this world culture of visual arts. But I have heard Charles say some beautiful things when he has been asked to sum it up in a couple of sentences, so I might defer to you for if you can remember.
I think there's a self-consciousness that I have often about, like, what's the first word or what's the first descriptor I use on any given artist's work? Like, do I say, this is a cancer survivor, this is a woman, this is a just out of school, this is a Vietnam veteran, and I feel like those are very potent first words. It's first impression. And so it's very hard for me to figure that out, and I play a little game sometimes. It's like, if I get asked 5 times today about any artist's work, each time I'll say it a different way. Or I'll say, like, here's Rick Bartow, he lives in Newport, and Rick Bartow is a Vietnam veteran. And then the next one is like Vietnam vet, or whatever, it will change. And it's very difficult. I find that a single identifier or single identity is a real challenge as well. Part of the conversations I have with curators and with collectors and artists is, especially in the contemporary Native American art community, is it's not the single way that they see themselves. Like, sure, Rick is a member of the Wiyot Nation, a Native American tribe in Northern California, but he reads voraciously. He's traveled the world. His eyeballs are so acute and absorbent, and he writes music. He's a singer and songwriter and plays guitar, and he's had losses in his life, and he's had many joys in his life, and those are a variety of ways that we can look through or look at Rick's work. And I think I try to bring that same sensitivity to all of the artists I work with. But talking about contemporary Native American art, and I've asked filmmakers that are Native American, and bead workers that are Native American, and printmakers that are American Indian, and it's like, well, that's one thing. And Rick said it, I think here's the soundbite. Rick's mother would bring him to church. She was Anglo, and his father's side of the family is where the Wiyot heritage came from. His uncle would bring him to powwow. And you can't just check off on a box like, I'm only Native, or I'm only Christian, or I'm only Anglo. It's like multiple choice. I hope that helps.
I can give you one word that I think of when I look at Rick's work, which elevates it up beyond the norm. Courage. He has the courage to put himself in a piece. And his self has changed throughout the years, and his self is multiple selves. But how many of us have the courage to expose ourselves that way? And he does. And not a lot of artists do. They make fun pieces or cute pieces or clever pieces or political pieces. He has the courage to give you himself. And I think that's a really marvelous thing for an artist to be able to do.
Good. Bill, I bet you have. I like this question.
Ditto.
I mean, it was
I think it says a lot of it. I mean, it's just when you look at the work, a lot of the work, it's just the impact it makes on you, and I think that's actually a pretty good statement. He does put a lot of himself into his work, and it's obvious, and it's just the impact it has on me, and I think a lot of other people. And if you, like all artists, some have more of an impact than others, but you look at some of that work, and all it takes is a glance, and it's right there. And that's Things You Know But Cannot Explain. I like that title.
You had another question.
Okay, one last question.
No, it really wasn't a question, but
Oh, a comment.
it's a follow-up to what Bill said and the impact. I have some pieces of Rick's, and it really has nothing to do with Rick as much as it has to do with the work. And people come in and they'll say, that gives me the EBGBs.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that is weird. I'm uncomfortable. Or they'll come in and they'll say, wow, you moved that piece. It's over here, and that's where it needs to go because it's got the action. You know, it's in flight. That is a better place for it. These are people that are not art collectors. These are people that don't even buy art necessarily, but they come in and another person will come in and say, I really like that piece. And I don't ask them why they like it, but they offer that, and it's someone that is coming in it's a workman that's washing my windows or something. You know, it's so my response to your question was I think it's that Rick's work elicits passion and a response from the viewer. And they don't even have to be a collector of art. They don't have to be educated. They don't have to know Rick. They see the work and it's like, I'm going to respond to it. And it happens all the time.
Well, I think you're exactly right. It's that perfect storm of the story being so compelling, the imagery being so fascinating, whether you have a positive or negative response. If you're frightened or excited by it, the response happens. And that the materials are so interesting, and you look at a sculpture and think, well, what was he using here? And it's all those different components. We see people walk through our galleries all the time who might stop and look at something in one of our galleries, but there may be other galleries in the museum. You can tell by their walk and where they're looking that nothing is catching their eye, and that's fine. Maybe the Japanese gallery isn't their taste, or what's currently on view in the regional art gallery isn't of interest. I have not seen anyone just casually walk without stopping through this exhibition, because people get into that space, and even if they're not there a long time, you can see that people are engaging with the work, they're actively looking. If it's just one thing, they're making that connection with something that their eyes settle on. No one's just getting from point A to point B, and that's certainly the work is doing that on its own without reading a label, without maybe knowing anything about Rick. It's something visually they're experiencing. So I think you're exactly right, and how wonderful to share a story from this happening in your home too, where you're seeing it again and again from different people. Well, thank you so much for your time. I am so appreciative. I do want to plug our upcoming event related to this exhibition on May 30th. So next Saturday, we're having a symposium in this space that we'll open the museum early that day at 10 a.m. So from 10 to noon, we'll have a panel on art and healing, which will include members of the university community, including our program director for arts and administration, who's the coordinator of the arts and healthcare management concentration. We'll have a graduate student in philosophy and women's and gender studies talking about the relationship between gender and PTSD and recovery, which is the focus of his research, a licensed art therapist, a writer and critic. So they'll all be talking about ways that the visual arts promote healing, how they might help in recovery from trauma. It's in response to themes present in this exhibition, but they'll be looking at it in a much more broad sense to talk about their various practices, the way that they sort of interpret that theme of art and healing. And then from 2 to 4 in this lecture hall, we'll have speakers talking about contemporary Native American creative practice, decolonization, and all the politics therein. So I'm really excited. We've had some changes in our speaker lineup for this event due to cancellation due to some of our previous speakers unexpected health issues. So we'll have Dr. Amy Lonetree, who teaches at University of California, Santa Cruz, who wrote the book on decolonization in museums. So it's so amazing she was available to come and talk about her research there. Jennifer O'Neill, who's our university historian and archivist, who's previously worked at the Institute of the Smithsonian's archives. And Lindsay Baer, director of California Indian Publishing at Heyday, and the artist Wendy Redstar, who's based in Portland, who's also a program associate for the Native Arts and Cultures Foundation. So we'll have these 4 women who I think all of them are from various Native backgrounds themselves, just talking about the work that they're doing and how we as people working in cultural institutions can better work with Native artists to make sure their artists are represented, their voices are represented. So all that information is on our website and in our newsletter and in materials available in the museum. So we hope you'll join us on the 30th. It's not Saturday 3 days from now. It's Saturday, May 30th, a week from this Saturday. Yes, coming up quickly, though. So thank you so much to all of our guests and our speakers for spending time with us today, and thank you, too.
Thank you.